completed, and it's in front of you, but we're very fortunate that we have had selected Allie Sterling, and I think a lot of you've met her, and I'll let her give the rest of the introduction about herself, because we're so excited. Sometimes I get so excited I can't talk.
This has been very exciting for everyone. Okay. So good. You want me to just take it over?
Yeah,
all right.
I'll let you take it over.
Start up the projector, right? Or just use the cap on. That's all. That's easy. Great. Okay. And Carly, everything's set to tape?
Yeah,
So
if you stand like
if I should stand that way. Okay. All right. Tell me what to do. So. Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thanks for having me this morning. It's great to be here and great to be able to share with you. Essentially, yeah.
Turn the lights off.
Yeah.
Oh, then we'll see it a little better, right? Yeah, be able to share with you and walk you through the feasibility report. You know, there's so much information in there, and so this way I can kind of lift out a few key things that I think are important, and that's why we developed the PowerPoint, because it'll do exactly that. So again, there's lots of things inside of it that are interesting, but I think the need to know information we'll spend time on, and I'll answer any questions that you have and any thoughts or ideas, etc. So for those of you who I haven't met, which is only a few, I am from Toledo, Ohio, so we have a firm based in Toledo, but we do work throughout the country. Everything from feasibilities just like this to actual campaign management. So we actually assist with the project then moving forward. We do board work, just developing boards, strategic planning with nonprofits. So everything having to do with nonprofit and building the strength and building the infrastructure and the success ultimately, which usually boils down to fundraising and being able to raise money and galvanize a community around a project. So I'm happy to take this and to do this personally. It's been truly a joy to get to know better. That not just the Dexter community, Gordon Hall, everything. One of our team members actually lives in Dexter, so it was kind of a nice fit too. So she was really helpful throughout the process and met with Beverly and Carol a couple times too. So it was a nice team effort all together. So let's walk through this, and feel free at any time to interrupt me or ask me to clarify something.
Can I ask who the team member is that lives in Dexter?
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel Baldwin.
Okay.
She is a native of Sylvania, Ohio, and she and her husband and her family moved out to Marblehead, Massachusetts for many years. And when they moved back, or wanted to come back this way, they wanted to be somewhere in they chose Dexter. I mean, it was a concerted choice, you know, based upon a whole bunch of other reasons other people choose Dexter as well. So yeah. Oh, then good. I'm glad. Yeah, thanks for.
And I've had breakfast with her twice, so she has been independently recruited.
Yes, Carol has had ulterior motives from the beginning. Yeah, so she's young kids and loves the project. So smart. Yeah, smart to try to recruit. That's for sure. Okay, so why feasibility? I always start off by sharing why we even do this, because there are a lot of organizations that kind of say, why would we invest in something? We know we can raise the money, or we know the project is needed, and let's just move forward and go ahead and put the campaign together. Well, there are lots of reasons why doing that's not the best always, and we talk about, you know, three primary areas. One, people love to give feedback, right? They love to be asked their opinion. It's important, of course, as you're putting together a huge campaign, not to make any assumptions. We find so many campaigns that we enter into kind of midpoint that are stalled, and they're stalled because the pre-work wasn't done, and they made assumptions based upon and biases, right? Based upon what we believe will work, and sometimes it doesn't always turn out exactly the same way. So it gives people certainly validation that what they say, what they think matters, that their donations in the past have made a huge difference to the organization as well. The second bullet there, one of the things that's very key is we want to assess how much you can raise, right? So by being able to have conversations about that, we can come up with a realistic goal amount. So that way, hopefully, we're not setting a goal amount that's unrealistic, or we're not going to get to, and we're also not setting one that maybe is, you know, not as assertive. Yeah, not too low. Exactly. So lots of reasons to do it. We find that even with organizations that do not go on to complete a campaign for different reasons, they just aren't ready, it provides them at least a blueprint for how they need to be ready in 12 or 18 months, and what they need to do to change either some perceptions or build some strength in areas that they're a little weaker in. So again, it's a great, for any fundraising initiative, it's a good investment and a wise investment. And the other thing is too, especially with some funding sources, they want to know that you've done this piece. They want to, and from an investment perspective, they want to make sure that you've also been diligent. So we heard that feedback from lots of people saying, wow, like this is so impressive that they are doing a feasibility and that they're actually asking for my opinion. And so it's a really goodwill factor too. So we heard a lot of that when we were interviewing. What makes a campaign successful? There is a document, actually, well, geez, it's kind of hard to see this here. In your report, all the way towards the back, there's a visual as well. These are the areas, so these words are exactly the same ones in that visual. These are what we test for. So we're looking to test about reputation. What kind of reputation does the organization have in the community? Is it a positive one? Is it a dicey one? Is it, mixed? Who knows? Project need, really important. Do people care about the project? And you would assume that people do, and usually they do, but we've come across a couple things in the past where surprisingly the organization really felt it was a need, but the community did not agree, and so there has to be some reconciliation there around how to do it maybe a little differently. Fundraising experience, really obviously important that an organization has had experience with fundraising. Is it essential that they've had this long, robust, history with fundraising? Not necessarily. There's a lot of things that can kind of balance that. We'll talk about what those things are. Campaign volunteers, is there a ready group of people that, want to support something, want to lead? Infrastructure and culture, how readily is the organization able to support a campaign effort? Because these things are big and they take over lots of time and they require a lot of energy and, additional hands-on work. Feasibility, that's what we're doing. Environment, what's the environment like? 2008, 2009, our feasibilities usually proved that people were not willing to give up their funds because they were losing their funds at a record pace. So coming out of the recession and out of a lot of that, we're now in an environment certainly where people are feeling a little bit more confident in their funds and in the future. So leadership, what kind of leadership is going to be necessary to pull off the kind of campaign that an organization is looking at? Is that leadership available? Leadership's probably leadership and project need are probably one of the biggest areas, I'd say, where an organization or a campaign is going to be successful or not. And then sustainability. How likely is it that the organization, after they complete a campaign, will be able to sustain these new donors, these new gifts, and steward that? So that's another variable that's important. So we are testing for all of these things as we ask questions and we have conversations with folks. So this is the backbone of what we're doing. And that, again, just the visual. So we developed the case. In your report in the back is another example of the case. I think everyone's seen the case. It was a gorgeous piece. I mean, and I say that I know we created it, we co-created it with you, but it really was one of our better ones. I don't know if it was just because the Gordon Hall is so gorgeous and so, yeah, it's that one there.
It's the last page.
Oh, thank you. Yep, last couple pages. Outlined essentially why we did why the Historical Society is interested, what's the project all about, what's the approximate budget, answered some of those questions, sent that out to those that we talked to, and so that way they could give it a read and take a look at it. Most people did. Most people actually had looked it over. That isn't always the case. So that says a lot about your stakeholders, that they actually might care a little bit more than others, which is a nice thing. So then we selected our stakeholders, we sent out the invitations, and we did the follow-up, and we scheduled the appointments. So that was the infrastructure behind it. I usually start off with just saying, here's what we found, because everyone's skipping to the end of the report anyway to figure that out. They don't want to wait till the end, so I just put it up front. And I'll talk about the specifics later, okay? But $3 million is what I feel comfortable and confident that you'll be able to raise. Now, this is a hybrid. This is a half and half, though. 1.5 in private funds, individual donations, which is individuals, and then the other 1.5 equaling the 3 in grants And so that's another source of revenue that you guys have certainly been involved in, and we have some interest already, and so you're actively looking at that. But 1.5 is kind of the key as far as individual private donations. So we tested and we looked at, okay, how do these areas come down? You'll see that from a strength perspective, we looked at reputation and awareness, the project need, definitely strengths of the Historical Society. Fundraising experience, it's kind of in both, because you did an amazing job, right, raising a lot of money for the mortgage, but at the same time, your organization's not one that has like, a continuous development program. And so I kind of put a check in both categories for that. Campaign volunteers, I think that's going to be an area, like a lot of organizations, that we really need to talk about and focus on. And same thing with infrastructure. You're an all-volunteer organization. So that's certainly nothing, that's not news to you, but it is a challenge area, an opportunity to
Allie, what do you specifically mean by infrastructure?
Ability to support the heavy lifting of a campaign. So, for instance, gift processing, data recording, sending out thank you letters, organizing events, being able to deploy volunteers to solicit other people, a system inside to work all of that. So usually if there's a staff person, we can take part of that staff person's time and, and do it that way. But there's lots of models we can use from a volunteer perspective as well, a dedicated volunteer, for instance, and et cetera. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Then we saw, obviously, strength is that you did the feasibility. The environment's great right now, and I'll speak even more specifically to Dexter as to why the environment's really good for you as well. Leadership and sustainability, we'll talk about those. I think that those are just a little bit of a challenge areas we heard from people. Sustainability, it just goes back to being a volunteer organization. People always think, oh, like what's going to happen after the campaign, et cetera. So we'll talk about those things in detail. Okay, so reputation and awareness. How I've set up these slides is we're going to go through each of those and talk about, some of the key takeaways. And again, there's lots of copy in there you can read later, but key takeaways and then pre-campaign action steps. We feel it's important to say, okay, here's what we found, and here's what we should be doing in response to that over the next maybe 3, 6, 12 months sort of thing, depending on the timeline. So excellent, great reputation. I heard so many times this was just glowing constantly. So kudos to you guys, truly. That doesn't happen all the time. Usually I hear a mix, people who don't like the organization for different reasons. Just not the case at all. I love the word tenacity, because everyone said, those women, they are tenacious, and they whatever they set their mind to, and men, of course, but we heard women mostly. Whatever they set their mind to, man, they do. They follow through. They stay committed to something, and that's big. That's a really big deal. We did hear that, okay, but at the same time, how can we, get a bigger group of people who can support this effort? And, does the greater community, are they aware of the Historical Society? And so is this seeping out into other circles of influence and other circles of kind of, just involvement from a community perspective? So as far as action steps are concerned, I think any time an organization is going to be launching a capital campaign, no matter the organization, we always recommend a soft PR campaign, an awareness, taking whatever you're doing currently and cranking it up a couple notches, or if you're not doing anything from a PR and awareness campaign, maybe considering doing something. And so, we can talk through those things later on. Leveraging the history, the accomplishments, and the vision. So one organization we worked with, just to give you an example of what this would look like, was going to be tackling a $6 million campaign. They knew that their awareness in the general community was low. Within the legal community it was very high, but within the general community, they were going to need the general community. Actually, they had a Kresge grant they were really going to need, because that was when Kresge was still doing challenge grants, and we knew the community was going to be important. So before they kicked off the campaign, or at least the public campaign, they got a grant to do a bunch of outdoor signs, the good old-fashioned, route outdoor signs, and they did a PR campaign that talked about why what they do matters to the general community. And they, for 6 months, drove that in everything you'd see. You'd see it outside, you'd see it in the newspaper, you'd see it, in any outlet and medium they could do. And it really helped, because by the time another 6 months passed and we were in the community asking for support, we think that it made a difference to how people responded, and we didn't have to do as much education as to why, why what they were doing mattered from a general community perspective. So that's just an idea, or an example, I should say. As far as project need was concerned, as far as our testing with this, we had almost 100% agreement, that the project is definitely valid, definitely something that is needed yesterday, people would say, and we all knew this, we were going to renovate, and so everyone, this is kind of an assumption that we were going to move in this direction. Couple areas of concern. A lot of people talked about, so what part's luxury, what part's functional, what part's essential, what are they going to, how are they going to make those decisions, what's important first from a mechanical perspective, a foundation perspective, and what's decorative, there's a lot of conversation about wanting to know more. Who will manage the project was a big deal. People talked about that. Not only from a campaign perspective, which is kind of what I was talking about, but they were wondering who was going to manage the construction project, who was going to be making those decisions, and managing all the different people involved in the renovation. So that came up, which makes sense. What is the business plan? This also was raised as well, and it had to do with sustainability. What the perception is that after renovations are done, there's going to be a lot more maintenance, or there's going to be a lot more upkeep, and whether or not that's true, I don't know, but that's the perception, and so we have to make sure that we acknowledge that's the perception, and we address the perception as we move forward from a campaign perspective. And what is, from the L perspective, the question was, well, but how much is that going to generate revenue-wise? Who has the experience from a rental perspective to be able to make those decisions and manage that process? So lots of good questions that, again, this is why we do this, right? So we go out and actually have all these questions answered in advance and can manage those expectations. So campaign action steps, simply you're working towards that project plan already. All these things are in motion. We just need to definitely make sure we have answers to these questions. Yeah. Fundraising experience. Spoke to the success of the acquisition and the mortgage and all that. Definitely said that it will be important that this next campaign is done maybe, with a little bit more direction and strategy, because people's sense was that this campaign was going to be a little trickier maybe than the mortgage acquisition, that it was going to be one that in order to make the goal, we were going to have some lead and major gifts and solicitation that looks very different than the style of fundraising potentially that occurred with the mortgage, with the acquisition. So there was a lot of interest in that, a lot of questions about, who would manage the strategy, questions about how long it would take. There was a sense and a feeling that this needed to be as concise as possible. And so, yeah, so that those questions came up. Again, real positive reactions, though, to your fundraising experience. One of the questions that would come up often, too, was, well, I haven't given anything really since those gifts. And so, how long has that been? And do others, when there's a gap in time between when a person's bigger gift and then there's 2 or 3 years afterwards, and there's not, continual, people do assign themselves and look for other charitable things to support. And so bringing people back into the fray of supporting this project, we'll just have to, we'll have to make sure to take that into consideration. So as far as action steps, it'll be very important with this campaign to secure those lead gifts early. Kind of pace setter gifts, if you will. Because what people care about when they're thinking about making a pretty sacrificial gift, many people want to know who else is making a sacrificial gift. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of synergy in being able to have the right people come out first and promote the fact that they believe in this, and they believe in it so much that they're making this sacrificial gift. And so there's like a domino effect that happens, and we need to make sure that from a strategy perspective, we kind of know who those early pace setters should be that will influence the next ring of people to do exactly the same thing. When that doesn't happen, a campaign can take a really long time, because what happens is you start getting small, you never want small gifts first. Because if you whatever people's minds are whatever comes in first sets the bar. So you do not want small gifts first because you do not want your bar set low. So this is a very critical and very extremely strategic part of your campaign. We always ask people, do not raise any money before you've got your strategy in place. So, or if you do raise money, keep it quiet. That's why they call it a silent phase. Everyone says, I don't understand what a silent phase is. Like, what? People know the campaign's going on. Like, it has nothing to do with the fact the campaign's going on. It has everything to do with how you're announcing money coming in and from who. So. Yeah, so anyway, so campaign leadership will be important. We'll talk more about that. And then there's that whole Dexter Community Fund, right? That whole other initiative that's happening in town that's raising money.
What's that?
Well, we don't know about it.
Oh, no?
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, so I heard about it a lot. And
They're
so.
in silent phase.
And they are, okay.
And as
Okay.
people, they probably wouldn't know that there's people, because they don't have children right now in school, so
Oh, okay.
that makes a difference too.
So I don't know if anyone wants to talk to what this is really quickly or speak to it better.
Probably a good idea. I can.
Yeah.
You don't have kids. I don't. But I was invited actually to participate in the kickoff of this thing. Basically, they want to start a Dexter Community Fund, like the Ann Arbor Community Fund or the Chelsea Community Fund. It's an endowment fund. It's meant to build over a period of years until they have enough that they can start to give grants, basically, after, I don't know, it might take 3, 4, 5 years
Probably.
to get enough in order to be able to do that. There's a group of, I don't know, 20 or so folks who are, I just participated in early discussions about it. They actually kicked off probably, I don't know, 2 months ago.
Yeah, just very
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they are in the silent phase, actually. That there was actual true discussion about how does the Gordon Hall effort sort of sit next to this effort. And nobody in the room felt that we were in competition, really, because this is our effort is more of a now, dollars.
It's a bricks
now
and
kind of
mortar
thing.
too. It's
Yes.
it's bricks and mortar.
Whereas that is much more of an endowment, sort of the kind of money that you might put in your will or something like that,
Mhm.
sort of a thing. And it's going to have, I mean, certainly there was definite conversation that, ultimately it could be that the Dexter Community Fund could be giving grants to Gordon Hall
Mhm.
in the end. But for this early phase, they didn't feel like there was a lot of direct competition in terms of the dollars that we would be going after, although the timing is probably pretty
Right.
similar, although they're a little ahead of us, I
Mhm.
think.
They're
Is that what
talking.
they're calling Focus Dexter? Is that the one with Hanson and Judge Bailey?
No.
That's in discussion.
No.
Yeah, that's, okay.
This is,
Oh,
and they have chosen to ally themselves with the Ann Arbor Area Community Fund. And so I think Ally will probably talk about that a little bit. But it's, Ann Arbor Area Community Fund is extremely well respected, has a very large fund, and one of the things they are particularly well respected for is the way they manage their money. So it's nice, actually, that this fund is, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's a focus. There's 2 or 3 different kinds of funds you can have.
Oh, a donor designated or a.
It's the other one.
Yeah, the other. I can't remember either.
Focus of interest.
Oh,
or
yeah,
something like that.
field of interest.
Field of interest. It's a
Mhm.
field of
That's right.
interest fund. It'll be set up as a field of interest fund that is sort of affiliated with the Ann Arbor Area Community Fund.
Yep, and managed by it, which is great.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it is a great thing that your community is investing in its own fund, which will give back to the community eventually. But yeah, timing, it's not the best because they're talking to some of the same people that we would be talking to. But I do believe that there's a sense of, openness with them. I mean, we talked, a couple of people that were in the interview said, I'm on that steering committee. We just need to make sure we're managing our leads well and we're not tripping over each other. And so they weren't the least bit like, well, what we're doing, and we're not sharing anything. They weren't like that at all. They were very, we want this to be a cooperative, collaborative experience. And I agree. It'd be different if it was a bricks and mortar project that was also happening at the same time, maybe from the same donor base. So it is a little different, but it's something to be aware of and to make sure that we coordinate with them. So, but different kind of ask for sure. Okay, moving forward as far as volunteers are concerned, we intentionally made sure that we were talking to lots of different people, that we weren't just interviewing one group, very like-minded people. We stretched, we talked to lots of different people, and everyone I talked to was very interested in having a role in the campaign and in being a volunteer and supporting it. They really were, with the exception of some people saying time is a problem for me because I have 4 kids, or I work full-time and have 4 kids, kind of thing. But everyone was very inclined to help out, which I think says a lot, and it's going to be very, very important for you, because we're going to want to make sure, if we're going to raise this money from the community, we want to have as many diverse people on our leadership, volunteer group as possible to represent those different constituency groups that are important to the success. So we just need to be very strategic again in that regard. We would want to choose campaign leadership very well, as well as the conversation I was having about gifts coming in and making sure that is sequentially important. Leadership is the same thing. So, selecting leaders, like the chairpersons of the campaign, selecting those people is critical, because again, for other people to sign on, they always say, well, who signed on first? Who's already there and who already is endorsing it and is going to lead it. And so this is the other area that's very critical in how it rolls out and how it gets communicated. So, and again, I think in order to truly make this a community project, we just need to make sure that we're looking at, who those key influencers are within each of the pockets of your community, and have a good mix of people. So no surprise here, but it will be very critical, because it's a big undertaking. No matter if it's a 2-year campaign or a 1 year, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of work. Infrastructure and culture, your volunteer staff, definitely this came up often. Because a lot of people are used to campaigns happening within organizations that have staff. They're just used to that. And I can tell you that even as a consulting firm, when we talk with organizations that are volunteer-led, we kind of get a little nervous too, right? Because someone has to lead. A lot of organizations say, well, we're going to parcel out the responsibilities. These 4 people are going to do that, and these 2 people are, and that isn't sustainable. That model, we've not seen that model work. There has to always be one person who's truly the project manager, who owns it, is responsible for it, and can deploy other people as they see fit. But to go into like a democratic approach and have, 4 people, 5 people taking bits and pieces, it can be difficult to actually get that done, because what you need is quick response, etc. Now, that all said, working with your group has been better than I've worked with staff people. So, truly, everything we've needed, or, any timeline we've met everything because of how responsive everyone has been. So I say that very seriously, because that usually is not the case. And so I have confidence that even as a volunteer team, that you have the ability to create that infrastructure that's necessary. I really do. It'll take, again, a commitment from a few people to giving a lot of their time towards this. And one of the recommendations we put into, or mentioned, I should say, in the full report is, it could be that there's a volunteer in the community who is at retirement age, or already in retirement, but actually wants to tackle something like part-time or full-time, and could be seen as a project manager for a duration of, for the campaign. As long as they don't expect to get paid for it, but if they wanted to sign on and have that job, and really look at it as a job with a title and everything, I think there are people that you could look to do that. Some people said that, so I think that's really great. So just need a plan. It's going to be important for people to know that, though. So, because one of the first things people said, well, how are they? They're volunteers. How are they going to manage this? So we just need to make sure that once there's a solution to that, it's very clear and it's articulated to folks in advance, so that way they don't have the ability to say, well, how's that going to be managed? And you'll just know that's how it'll be managed.
I know in Ann Arbor we have a large SCORE
Oh, yeah,
affiliate.
right.
And what that gets, you
Oh,
know,
that's a good
because
idea.
of drawing in from the Ann Arbor and all around the areas, I would look at all of that tape.
Right.
Right from
It's a
the
great
students.
idea. Yeah. Yeah. SCORE's such a good group. Yep. Feasibility. We took that step. We did the feasibility. Many people complimented the Historical Society on this investment. So this is a biggie. This communicating results and next steps. That's one of your next steps after today. Is how do we communicate back, and what do we communicate back to those people who were involved in the study? And even if it's nothing conclusive, but it's just, everyone was thanked, which is terrific and was the first step. But now, some organizations, they even get those people back together again once they're a little bit down the line, a couple months, 6 months or so, and say, we want to host an evening to tell you what we found. So we kind of do even another one of these. And we wouldn't do it exactly the same way, because if we're going to go forward on the campaign, we want to lift it up and we want to get them to see themselves, continuing to see themselves having a role, a leadership role in it. So there's lots of things we can do. Some organizations simply sent out a letter, from their leadership indicating that we had a very favorable, feasibility response. Looks like the project is, full steam ahead. We have some work to do, to get to that point, but we'll keep you just something back. Because one of the things we hear a lot of times from participants is that they don't know what happened. They didn't hear anything until they were asked for money. So we don't want that to happen. We want something in between. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Environment, certainly nationally, we definitely see an uptick in charitable giving. When you get to a retirement situation, people are going to be guarded about those funds. That's just human nature. So, we do need to make sure we're going to be able to allow, hopefully, for 3-year pledges, because people give more when they have an opportunity to spread that over a period of time. Depending on the size of the gift, there are some situations where you go up to 5 years if the gift is, sizable enough. But I would say, in general, not to, because you'll need you have a cash flow issue otherwise. Deferred and legacy gifts. Really, when you're training volunteers to solicit gifts, you might as well train them to talk about legacy, to talk about deferred giving at the same time. It does not hurt. It's the same conversation. That way, at least you're planting the seed that in addition to whatever gift that person might be giving to this campaign, they are thinking, but I could also include Gordon Hall or the Historical Society in my estate and in my will and as a bequest. So we always train our volunteers to have dual conversations, because again, it doesn't hurt. And who knows what the payoff might be later on for you. So your community doesn't have a whole bunch of campaigns going on all the time, which is kind of good. But at the same time, it means that the community is not used to bigger giving. So I heard this a few times, like, well, we don't have lots of campaigns here, so people aren't primed necessarily to go from a $100 donor a year to a $10,000 donor a year. So that is something that could influence things. And when you have a community that has multiple nonprofits that are doing multiple campaigns, you have a little bit more likelihood that people are used to stretching like that. But it is what it is. It's not a big deal. Each community is very different. Need to work with the community foundation, certainly, in making giving easy. This is just, it's common sense, but just in all of the things you'll create from a collateral, meaning a document perspective. We just want to make sure it's very easy for people to give, and give pledges in ways that are flexible for them. So some organizations are very rigid. They need the cash. They're just going to accept cash gifts only. That's tough, because your dollars will be smaller. They just will. We all know how that works. And so if we can do the 3-year pledge, and some people back-end pledges, they, for whatever reason in their life right now, they want to give $10,000, they want to give $100,000, but they want the first payment, to be a smaller amount and then ratchet it up. So just that flexibility, it's worth, just mentioning. It's important. It makes a difference to people. So leadership, here's what we heard, that, board leadership will be essential. Without staff, people start to look to the board to see what their role is going to be, right? And that's always the first line of kind of reasoning with a community member. Okay, so no staff, so who's leading? So I think that's why it's important that this board, play a role. There were, questions. Well, will the board be actively involved in the fundraising efforts? And again, I don't answer questions. I just allow people to ask them. But that's a question that should be answered at some point. What role the board wants to have in the fundraising campaign and the solicitation of donors, etc. And of course, every board who's in a campaign, the 100% giving is obviously an important thing and always needs to happen as well. Even if it's small amounts, but just being able to have the board say first, we gave 100%, is very important. So clarifying the role as far as action steps, 100% giving and endorsement. Your grants and everything's going to require those that giving as well. So this was the feedback we heard here, so I think there's some good things to talk about later on as well. Sustainability, what I would recommend is that the campaign has a sustainability plan built into it, meaning, so after the campaign is successful, you're going to continue to have people who need to be invoiced, right? Because they made pledges out 3 years. And you'd be so surprised when we get into organizations who have had turnover either from staff or volunteers and who are no longer sending invoices to it happens all the time. Amazing. So the campaign meets its goal. Yay, great. A year and a half later, right, because somebody either quit and then the next person's like, I didn't know I was supposed to be invoicing these people. No one told me to invoice these people. And you're not going to call the organization. I mean, most people don't call the organization and say, hey, I owe you money. Most people don't do that. Some people do that, most don't. It's amazing how much money is lost after a campaign is complete. It's amazing. So the sustainability plan, even if it's a small aspect of your strategy, and even the case that, as we update a case, we want to insert something in there that says, and we know exactly what we're going to do afterwards. We're going to continue the stewardship we put into place now. The other weird thing about campaigns is that there's all this energy when you're in campaign mode. Everyone's excited, everyone's talking up to donors, there's all this hype, everything's going great. And the minute the campaign's over, it's like, and so if I'm a donor, I'm like, well, I was treated so well during the campaign, and then all of a sudden, nothing. And so we want to make sure that we have a communication plan, that there's a stewardship plan in place, so that way that doesn't happen. And again, these are just things that we see as we travel across the country asking people, well, what happened after the campaign? And you have such a great opportunity. I mean, you're going to have all these new donors, right? You're going to have all these new volunteers and donors. So you get to transition those people into different roles for the organization, which is so exciting. And people also say, well, we're concerned because won't the campaign take away from our annual fund? Won't people not give us as much in the end of year appeal or the events that they go to? There's always a concern about that. We don't find that that's the case. People know, as long as they're articulating this is a special cause, this is out of this pocket versus that pocket, right? We need both for this period of time. We see annual fund efforts after a campaign spike because you're getting people more excited about what you're doing and they're investing in it and they own it now. They own part of Gordon Hall in their mind, And so they're going to be even more excited to go to more of your events and give you more annual fund money. So it's actually the opposite that happens, even though people believe that it's going to be a spike down afterwards. It doesn't happen that way, as long as there's a sustainability plan. So just a couple thoughts there. So in summary, here we go. We need a goal where we can claim success, right? We don't want it too high. We want to be able to definitely claim success. It's very important for organizations to do this. We want a longer silent phase because I think that when we get to the community phase, we're going to get lots of activity, lots of people supporting it, but those are small dollars. And so we don't want to be in a situation where we too early on went into a community phase and now are having, again, small dollars. The last part of a campaign, the last money is always the most difficult, always is. We want to raise as much as we can, bigger gifts, sizable gifts in the beginning. We just want to make sure that our odds are good before we flip. Everyone talked about Gordon Hall being a community gem. I mean, it's their gem. They love it. They reminisced about the first time they saw it. where they were in their life at that time, what they, it is just so sentimental and so romantic for people to think about Gordon Hall. They feel like they own it. So this campaign, all the things we create as far as messaging and as far as training and as far as a community efforts when we get to that point needs to, hearken that messaging as well, because it definitely is already there. We don't have to create it. Lead gift solicited with strategy, as we talked about, and making sure that we have leadership that can truly devote time to the project. Sometimes we will tell an organization, you know what, we just need a name. We need a real strong name. If that person, for whatever reason, cannot be a worker bee, because they have worker bees, then it's okay. In this situation, we need someone, we need both. We really need, someone of influence who can, endorse this project, but also can really get behind it and really make asks. Making asks, cultivating relationships, and pulling the trigger on asks is going to be essential. It just always is. And so finding those volunteers does take a little bit of extra time. A large cabinet, definitely need a large cabinet. In order to make this goal work, as I talked about a few minutes ago, we need to have folks that represent as many constituencies within the community as possible. Business, education, civic, philanthropy, all the different usual things that we'll, want to pinpoint, etc. So that way, because those volunteers, what they do is they go back to their own. And then they have essentially created a mini campaign model, if you will. So we could see a whole business campaign, right? We could see a whole education-based campaign, a whole professional organization like Rotaries and all of those civic organizations, etc. So the more diverse, the better. 100% board giving and visible involvement. That project phasing, business case, and kind of those nuts and bolts, we have to figure those things out. But again, you guys are already kind of down the line doing that work right now. I'd like to see a legacy ask embedded with those solicitations, coordination with the Dexter Community Foundation, having a strategy partner, making sure that no matter who it is, you've got someone after the strategy set that is holding you accountable for those benchmarks and for those milestones as you get there. And as you veer off course, which always happens too, and it's normal, but how to get back on course or recognize you're off course, right? Having a PR and marketing campaign around this as well. And then the case for support, all that means is the document that we tested, the one there at the back of your report, that gets kind of built out again, right? So it becomes bigger and it addresses essentially these kinds of questions that came up. So once we get solve these answers, or get these answers in place, then essentially we update that document to make it full and robust and answer those things, and that becomes your collateral for the campaign. And you can tweak parts of it, and you can use it as a source document essentially for a website or for a pledge form or for whatever the other aspects are that you'll need. This is a sample of what this 3 million essentially would look like. I'm going to speak to the 1.5 though, because I've got loaded in here private public grant funding 1.5. So the rest of it is individual donations. You're going to need at least one $250,000 gift and at least a $100,000 gift. And then you're going to need a lot of $50,000 gifts, like about 6. So again, things don't always line up this way. They don't, but it's a good guidepost to know that that's where that bar needs to be set. You need a $250,000 gift. And I think you've got options for that, for sure. So I think this is realistic. I based this on the feedback that I received. And so then you get into the 25,000, the 10,000, and you got a quantity there. You're going to need 15 to 20 of those size gifts in order to make the math happen. And you might raise more. And so the more you raise in the private area, the less you need there, and vice versa. The more you raise potentially in the grant area, the less you might need. So those are going to balance each other out. We'll see how it comes in. And then, $1,000 and less, that's that big community phase. But we want those gifts to be higher. We want to say to families, you know what, we would love a $1,000 gift, spread it over 3 years. Or maybe $250 for 4 years. I mean, that's manageable for a lot of people, $250 a year, but it gets us at a $1,000 pledge from a family. So there's lots of different ways we can look at this, which will be very important, which is why flexibility is very important, because someone saying yes to $1,000 that has to be paid in full, very different than $250 over 4 years. So and we all make decisions that way. Draft timeline, again, this is very drafty. It depends when we decide to get moving. We've already accomplished the feasibility, right? So we're already into Q1 of 2015. And pre-campaign planning, which is everything to do with, again, updating the case, getting your volunteer team in place, knowing what that leadership team looks like, answering all those questions, doing all that kind of work, takes a little while. And so we have quarter 2 through 4. So really, you need about 6 to 8 months of just getting everything ready to go and to kind of kick the campaign off. That means that leadership's in place, everyone's been trained, they've been given their prospects, and they're out the door asking. So that takes at least 6 to 8 months to get to that point. I've got grants and research plugged in at the same time. So based upon what I just said, campaign kickoff, because it's March already, I think the soonest you'll be able to kick things off. When I say kickoff, I do not mean community, I mean that silent phase. So where if everyone in this room is on the cabinet, you're all gonna have 7 to 10 names that you need to cultivate a relationship and ask for a gift, a very specific gift amount. And that process, we only give that process, which is campaign ignition, no more than 12 months. If you can't raise, in today's climate, if I can't solicit you for a gift within 6 months, it's not gonna happen. That means either you're avoiding me like the plague and it's not gonna work, or I'm not doing my job as a volunteer. If I haven't even contacted you after 6 months, I've failed as a volunteer. And so it's our attention span as a volunteer today is about 12 months, and that's about it we can do for a campaign. Used to be years ago we could keep campaigns going for 24 months, like the actual solicitation part. Not anymore. People are too overbooked, they're overcommitted, they've got a bunch of things, and they don't go to the meetings any longer. So there's a short window that we need to make sure to have happen. Public appeal, once we're at 90% of the goal, could see you having that here, and then really campaign being done. Done, everything complete by the end of 2017, or again quarter 1 of 18. So this is really approximate. Lots of things shift back and forth, but it at least gives you a little bit of a blueprint. So here's just a sample. Again, I think today we find campaign leadership being multiple people. Very infrequently do we see one campaign chairperson for campaigns any longer. And it's for the same reason. People are overcommitted. They love what they're doing. They're passionate about a cause, but they don't want to be the only person responsible for it. And so we see a lot of 1 to 3 different people, which I think works out great. I think it's fine. Honorary chairs, we have an opportunity to choose people that have a lot of significance to this organization and to Gordon Hall, who may not be doing a lot of heavy lifting. They may not be out there, doing as much work as others, but it's important that they're recognized as honorary chairs, and that they're making their own sacrificial gift, and that they're helping with some key strategic asks. So that's how we like to position those people. Steering committee tends to be that group that just behind the scenes is making sure everything's happening. They're kind of that central processing unit. They're there, they're making sure, again, the strategy's working, the asks are being made, along with, again, a campaign consultant if that's what you choose to do. So that's an important core group.
Allie,
Yeah.
before you pass that
Yeah.
one, the person you talked about earlier as a sort of a project manager
Yeah.
kind of a person, is that in the steering
Yeah,
committee?
exactly.
And so what kind of a person is a campaign chairperson?
They're the most influential person you can find to endorse this project and be out there leading it in the community. So it's that person where people go, oh, you got those people to lead this campaign. It's going to be a success, because they wouldn't assign their name to something that wasn't going to be successful. So it's that kind of person.
But they're not doing the...
They're on this. They are actually on the steering committee. So these people are going to also be part of that. It depends exactly who these people are. It depends. You may have a couple people. You need to have one person here who is active here. You may not have all of them. It depends who you select. But they are. No, they're owning it. They're definitely owning it. These people aren't as much. So this is symbolic. Lots of legacy here, right? People who may not be showing up at these monthly meetings. These people have to, or at least 1 or 2 of them. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. Thanks for asking that question. This always is one. It's organic. It changes, but people always have a lot of questions, because there's lots of ways you can configure a campaign. This isn't the only one. This just is an example of how we typically see it. We've had some campaigns that are absolutely flat. That there are 8 people chosen to raise $120,000 a piece. 8 people. get the right 8 people, you can get a campaign done. I mean, like, depends what your size is, and this is a campaign that the people that were selected were not the kind of people who wanted a hierarchy. They're like, don't have time for that. Give me the people I need to solicit. Give me my goal amount. I will raise it in this period of time. So lots of different ways to do it. This is standard though. And so then you'd see a cabinet. These are general volunteers who have signed on to raise money. So it's not just signed on because I want my name part of the cabinet. It's signing on to raise money. They will each have, 7 to 10 different names they need to cultivate. But in addition, I like to see, and I think this campaign would be set up very well to do this. I like to see these divisions, because what happens is if I'm on the cabinet, but I also am a leader in the corporate community, I'm going to want my own people, right? I'm going to want my own division, and I'm going to attract then 6 or 7 additional people who will help me raise my goal. It's like a team, sort of that team approach. And I think it would be very good for this campaign to have that approach, because you have lots of constituencies, and it will help you long term to broaden your support base and broaden your volunteer base. So I think it's in your best interest long term to do it this way. So this is, grants and foundations, same thing. People who love this stuff, who know where the donor advised funds are, who have private foundations. Great group. Schools and youth get a lot of potential there, that's for sure. But it needs special people who live and breathe schools and youth, live and breathe corporate. So anyway, so that's it. That's a lot, right?
Good job.
Oh, well, thank you. I just thought it would be nice to walk through that way versus, and thanks for setting everything up too, Beverly. So any questions I can answer? I know it is a lot, and there'll be, probably additional things we all think of later, but anything I can?
I guess for the Jeffries Foundation, which is what we're aiming at, right, Bev?
Right.
If we get into these private donations, is that going to make a difference if we have a certain timeline with them to?
If we got into Jeffers, once they would give us 3 years.
So they would.
But when can? But don't
Not
we have to
till
wait?
June.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could solicit, talk to people, but Jeffers is very particular. Let's say they call you and say June 18th. June 19th, you could actually have money coming in. You could already talk to these people ahead of time. But if you had any money coming in before, that wouldn't count toward the Jeffers Foundation.
Yeah.
Would it be of value to talk a little bit about the conversation with the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation? To just start to think about, there's one aspect that I think is pretty important, which is how are we going to steward this money that we bring in? It's a lot of money.
Yes.
And, do we have the expertise, the infrastructure, whatever, to manage it ourselves, or do we want to get help?
Yeah, so yeah, I'd love to share my conversation with Neil, which was a very positive one. So I spoke with Neil Hajar. Hajra, thank you. Neil Hajra on the phone, and we had a fabulous conversation. He's very supportive of this campaign, is very excited about it as well, and I think very excited about the Dexter Community Fund and just everything happening in Dexter, and so he was very supportive. He indicated, like other community foundations, that they have certain abilities to serve kind of as back office support and also obviously manage the funds that are raised. So both, which is, even if you weren't a volunteer staff or volunteer team, I would still I recommend to any organization, if they don't have the ability to manage the funds coming in or don't really want that responsibility, put it in the community foundation, because it says a ton to the community. One of the questions will be, if I'm going to give you $50,000, where's it going to be held? What are you going to do with it? What's your investment policy? Where are your investments, actually, by the way? What are you investing in? All those sorts of things. And so when either you don't want to bother with that, which a lot of organizations with staff included don't want to bother with that, or they're not good at it. I mean, it's a totally different, specialty area. It's good to have a community foundation manage that. So they have, obviously, the ability to do that. They also have the ability to actually process gifts, if you will, and actually steward the letters and send the letters out. And there's things they can do If they're like our Toledo Community Foundation, the basis points on that are very low. It's a very cost-effective kind of scenario. They also have a fund. I think Neil was telling me about a fund that they have where for every dollar raised, I can't remember exactly how he was phrasing it, but a certain percentage goes into a endowment fund. Now, I've seen this happen in campaigns where the ask will be for $100,000 or $10,000 or $1,000, but the decision was made at the beginning of a campaign that 10% of that gift, of every gift that comes in, unless the donor says they do not want to do it this way, 10% will go into a maintenance fund or an endowment fund, some sort of other fund that protects the organization, or carefully plans for maintenance and for just reserves. I like that. We find that donors don't mind that at all. Actually, donors kind of like that because they know that you're thinking forward about it, and they have some fund that just does that. Or he's the one who mentioned it to me. I can't remember in what context though, but I think a meeting with Neil will be very important for this board, or for having someone come here to talk about, from them to come here and talk about what they can do.
And I had the impression too that it was conceivable that we could partner with the Dexter Community Fund for that sort of thing as well, which ultimately goes through the Ann Arbor area.
Right. Yeah, and I heard that. I heard things like that too. I just don't understand exactly if what that will look like. But yeah, be great. Be a great first fund for them to have. Right? Would be the money's coming in for this campaign. Be a win-win.
I think people would feel better that you're saying Dexter Community Fund is, rather than, Ann Arbor has, with the university already, has that little bad kind, even though they're, maybe good stewards
good
of what
point.
they're doing.
Yeah.
It's still what they're going to perceive out there. It's going to the university.
Good point.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
That is one thing that, as a board, we need to think about of the university. I think if you read Allie's report, she heard that a lot. And even, we do need to have some kind of closure. As a board, we need to go to the university, be on the board meeting, something like that, because not expect, it's just awareness that a lot of people, even selling raffle tickets, people brought that up a lot.
Oh,
and
I
so
heard it over and over again too.
we need to have, as a board, we do need to plan some kind of closure there. I don't know if that'll be closure.
In reality, it was just a small group of people at the university that weren't supportive.
Right,
It was the regents at that time.
Right.
And they've all changed at this point, so.
And there's the university, there's been people at the university that have helped, over the time.
But I think, and I agree with all that, but I still think there needs to be something that Dexter people could go to have some kind of presentation to say what we've done with Gordon Hall. Because people have asked me, why haven't you gone back to the university? So we need to allow people or the board to do something, but there needs to be something there.
Agreed, and I should have hit on that. It did come up often. There's certainly a lingering bad taste in a majority of people that I think they just want, like you said, they just want a closing statement on it, and they want to know that maybe one more attempt was made or something. I don't.
I think we have to be careful though, and when we're talking about how we acquired Gordon Hall and stuff like that, the context that we put the university in, because I know, like, when we do the tours of Gordon Hall and stuff like that, it's just mentioned that that it was the university. Well, we should be more specific. We should say the Board of Regents at that time decided they wanted to sell the place.
That's a good
True.
Yeah.
Yep. Messaging's important.
Yeah, so that you're not just lumping the whole.
Right, the whole university forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So that's something that is necessary as an action step as well.
And you bring up the point of messaging. I think that somehow amongst this, we need to figure out what we're going to do and what we want out of it as we approach the university. But also, once that is closed, in whatever way it's closed, you know, maybe it will be they find somebody there finds a way to give us a lot of money and it'll be very positive. Maybe it'll just be, you know, we've had this conversation and it's the end now. Then our messaging after that has to let go of the bad feelings that we may have.
Right. Bless and release at that point.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's another thing that we'd probably want to integrate into a piece of collateral. What we tend to do is update the case, but then we usually do an FAQ sheet. And that FAQ sheet, it takes into consideration lots of different kind of lingering questions or questions people will have. It's not necessarily for the public's consumption, it's mostly for your campaign volunteers, so they can go to it if they get a question like, what about the university? And it says right there what we did and how it's been resolved, you know, so we would want to put that on an FAQ sheet for sure. Yeah.
So Allie's organization is one that could move forward to be that strategic partner that she talked about. And she's actually going to send us a proposal.
Right,
and you know, she and her organization, actually it's your organization, we were really kind of fortunate, I think, to get your particular attention here. You know, if that were to happen, she's already told me that it could be some of her other staff who might move forward with us, but
they're all great.
But they're all great.
And I'm part of everything anyway. I mean, it's not like, you know, I go away. It's just that you don't, it's hard for me to manage all the aspects and run a business. So it's good for me to have a wing person as well. Yeah, so I will follow up with you, Carol, with that. So, yeah.
And Melissa, just so y'all know, has been pretty integral in all of this discussion as well, and has another really excellent perspective on how, what, who, when to move forward, and has continued to give us a lot of her time.
She's such an
attention.
asset. I mean,
really
she's
is.
such an asset. If I could have a Melissa on every project, I would be so happy.
And she's feeling better now.
Right.
Pneumonia.
Yeah.
How, now, you're aware that we have a board election coming up in June.
Okay.
So there's gonna be some changes
Okay,
made.
uh-huh.
So how do we reflect on this, or do we get started with things now and then, because we don't know who's still gonna be on the board?
Yeah, right. I don't think it I mean, from this perspective, I see this as, you know, parallel tracks. You know, you'll have your own needs to do and make those decisions. And it actually starts off nicely because whoever that new team is will kind of, I mean, that's one thing, I guess, for the consideration of your board, is that this is going to be a paramount thing for your organization for the next 2 years. It will be all consuming and all encompassing. So whoever that board leadership team looks like will be owning this. I mean, and be incredibly intimately personal with it for at least 2 years, if not 3 years, when you just deal with like things afterwards. So I guess I would offer that that's probably an important thing as you look to.
I think it'll be a benefit too, because there might be some people that choose not to be on the board because they've been on for a long time, but they want to do something, part of it.
Yeah.
So
Good
I
point.
think you would have some new members and some members that have been on the board before that said, I enjoyed doing all this and I have the support, but I just want to be on this one.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that, you know, it's going to be up to this board. One of the things we are going to need is, in order to move forward, is an endorsement, an official endorsement by the board.
Mm-hmm.
And the board can choose to make an official endorsement next week, or they can choose to make an official endorsement, or not, obviously, after the new board comes in. But if that latter is chosen, we'll be off our timeline pretty significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now we don't have the election actually. Do we have it scheduled?
Mm-hmm.
I guess we just scheduled it the other night. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just a thing to
Good
keep
point.
in mind.
Good point. So if it's possible to move a decision up earlier, then yeah, that might make sense. It would. Yeah. So. Well, thank you guys for allowing me to share that information and for being part of all the stuff that we've done thus far. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
One of the reasons I wanted Allie to come and do this is, one, so you guys could hear all of the full round picture that she has of this, because we haven't done it before, and when we communicate with you, it's, you know, it's not nearly as rich as what Ally can offer. But I also wanted you to get a sense for the really wonderful expertise that you brought to this, and you and your organization both have really, I think,
Thank you.
done a very, very nice job.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Made my Saturday. Thanks. We love doing it. I mean, we love working with you guys, and I mean that truly, because you're really good people to work with. I mean everything we did.
Dexter is.
I told you, and I love your downtime. I love everything about Dexter. So it's been fun. So yeah, I'd love to continue to, if we can figure out a way to work together moving forward, I would love that. Our team would love that as well. So it would be great. So that's kind of my next step. But I will encourage, and maybe we can continue to talk that whole communication thing back to the stakeholders that interviewed. Let's talk about that and just how we want to do that, because I don't want, that's a little small detail that sometimes gets forgotten about in the shuffle of all the other decisions that have to be made. So I'll follow up with you on that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for all the setup, and thanks, Carly, for everything too. So.